In this video we'll discuss how well the Norwegian Joule worked for a solo introvert traveller. Since I've done this video style before for the Norwegian Bliss and P&O's Iona, I wasn't convinced I'd do a third, but my experience on the Norwegian Joule turned out to be profoundly different. Solo means I'm travelling alone. I've not pre-arranged so many meetups that I'm rarely actually by myself. Any social encounters tend to be random and serendipitous. I'm happy spending most of my time alone if that's how it goes, but I also don't mind engaging in conversation, small groups or on a one-to-one basis. When it comes to solo travel, my favourite phrase has become, no one cares. Over my 7 days on the Norwegian Joule, no one cared who I met, when I went to restaurants alone or when random conversations broke out. The whole thing was a non-issue. Any issues with travelling solo on this cruise would only exist on your head. And this can be a very valid problem, but rest assured, no one else cares. An essential requirement is environments I can hole up in and be comfortable without too much distraction. Ideally, these are places that aren't my cabin. I can be in areas with other people as long as it doesn't overly disrupt a sort of personal zen. My main concern about the Norwegian Joule was where I would spend most of my time outside my cabin. The weather was likely to rule out the outside areas, and the Joule was the smallest ship I'd sailed on, full of lounges that were really more bars than things purposed for relaxation. The Joule did have the Spinnaker Lounge, but it didn't seem to be the same as the Observation Lounge. It was a sort of predecessor that the Observation Lounge turned into, so that didn't feel right either. My concern over the available environments did prove true, but it also proved that it didn't matter. And this was for a number of reasons. First, despite cruising Alaska for 2/3 of the cruise, it was like cruising Mexico. I mean, whatever you think of global warming, there was definitely something going on there. The weather was that crazy, I didn't think I'd get to service my mudslide addiction on this cruise, but I did, multiple times, for 3/4 of it. I even experienced significant problems with the heat at Menendal Glacier and was basically begging for the bus to return because it was that hot I was struggling in the heat. It wasn't just UK warm, it was crazily warm. This meant the outside locations were a viable option for about 70% of the cruise. Second, the cruise dynamics were very different from my previous cruises. The 9-hour time difference between the UK and Vancouver proved to be a killer. I don't know if it's that I've just got used to not travelling by plane, but it was a killer. My sleeping patterns were disrupted throughout the journey due to jet lag and the crazy amount of daylight. I didn't think that would affect me so much. I knew it was going to happen. You know, I wasn't ignorant of how the sun works in northern climates, but yeah, it affected me more than I thought it did. And then I was constantly waking up early for scenic cruising, so I never really slept in. You know, then you have your excursion, then you have something to eat in the evening, you are fitting in some exercise around the promenade. You know, you may have a nap in your cabin in the middle of the day maybe, or early evening, depending on what you're doing that day. It's just, time was just absorbed. I mean, I've read 5 books in 7 days on other cruises, and on this cruise, I didn't even turn the Kindle on. Third, I did have a balcony. Due to Norwegian accepting my ludicrously cheap bid, so this may have helped, but in terms of the time I spent on the balcony, the truth is I didn't probably accumulate more than a couple of hours. And this was a surprise, because everyone swears by a balcony when you go scenic cruising, but I found I wanted to be on the deck, you know, to get the 360 view of things, not just the narrow window from my balcony. So I used the balcony a lot less than I thought I would. It was essentially a primitive form of air conditioning and a source of natural light, which was valuable because you eventually get a floor-to-ceiling window on one wall of your cabin, right? And I found that that was its main advantage rather than sitting outside. I loved the Norwegian Jewel on this cruise, but I suspect I might have hated it on the wrong itinerary. If the weather hadn't allowed the outside spaces to be used and the cruise provided insufficient food for the brain, I'd have been stuck with inside space that didn't really work for me. I'd consider some of these dynamics if I was cruising on the Norwegian Jewel again. The experience on this cruise was profoundly different from my previous 3 other cruises. Maybe it wasn't as different from the one to the Norwegian fjords, but it was certainly different to the one-to-one weather locations. Many would put it down to the smaller cruise ship, but that would misjudge the situation, I think, as it was a combination of the smaller cruise ship and the itinerary. The Norwegian Jewel is a smaller ship with only 2,300 guests, and the occupancy was actually 1,400, so it was a smaller ship with low occupancy. One of the outcomes of that is you'd bump into the same people all the time. I must admit, when I was on the Norwegian Bliss or P&O's Iona, anyone I bumped into, I never met again. It was like they vanished into the void of a significantly sized ship. It's crucial to realise bumping into the same people can be a negative rather than a positive. I don't really want to do the whole holiday friends thing, and that results in serialised surface conversations or a sort of weird bragathon. You know how it works, right? Or the need to engage in social occasions that might not be my thing. So this is where things interact with the itinerary. There is something about cruising to Alaska that other scenic cruisers may share. As I said, I found elements of this on my cruise to the Norwegian fjords, but it was more intense in Alaska. You were heading far north, up to the 55th parallel, and if you go to seaward, you peak at the 60th. It does feel like the closest most of us ordinary mortals will get to a frontier. There is a lot of time spent on the open deck, taking in the Inside Passage or Glacier Bay, and somewhat surprisingly, the constant inlets you spend most of the cruise winding between as you make your way to Skagway and before breaking out to across the Gulf of Alaska. This creates one unique outcome: an intimate shared experience. Combined with the low occupancy and a mid-sized ship, it further enhances that feeling. This is like food for the introvert brain, because it transforms the nature of these serendipitous conversations that you have on these holidays, from serialised challenging surface platitudes and bragathons to ones that are like meaning, and they have meaning and purpose and depth. Some of the conversations I got into with the people I serendipitously met on this cruise were pretty damn deep. It was genuinely brilliant, bordering on the profound. I'll give you a straightforward example of the magnitude of this difference. I chose to share restaurant experiences with some of the people I met on this cruise. That is a big deal. I never do that, as usually it's my worst nightmare, because quite often the conversations I overhear from shared tables on cruises are just awful. But I actually did it on this cruise. And it was something I wouldn't necessarily repeat on other itineraries, but on this one, brilliant. So does cruising on the Norwegian Jewel get the solo introvert thumbs up? Well, yes and no. I still feel concerned that the design of this older and smaller ship means the locations I look for, especially inside, are in short supply. It's sort of ironic, considering how most people think of how introverts work, that it is the bigger ships that provide the sort of environments I like. The lack of an internal environment that satisfies my relaxation and zen needs is a bit concerning, especially if the outside environments couldn't serve that purpose. If I was to sail on the Norwegian Jewel, it would have to be a very specific decision matching ship to itinerary to make sure it got a certain outcome. The Norwegian Jewel gets the solo introvert cruising thumbs up on this cruise despite that. This is due to the dynamics of the scenic cruising and our fortuitous weather, meaning you rarely looked for that relaxation inside location, so it wasn't missed. The most important thing is the Norwegian Jewel taught me something new. I tend to keep myself to myself on cruises. Conversations happen, but they aren't the mainstay of the experience. The Norwegian Jewel cruise bundles several factors, including ship size, occupancy, and the nature of the Alaskan environment, that created a shared experience among strangers that was a critical element of the cruise. I honestly found it quite profound. So depending on the circumstances, I'd conclude that the Norwegian Jewel may not meet my solo criteria. Still, an Alaska cruise on a smaller ship that is only half full was a glorious revelation. You should check out the video here to see how the Norwegian Bliss delivers on a solo introvert traveller cruise experience.